Hello everyone, this is Heather. It is my great honor to take part in the 2025 IOHSK International Conference to share my recent research related to climate change. The topic of this research is correlation between knowledge and attitudes of climate change in amateur and recreational athletes, a comparative study. I'm the presenter Heather, and this study was conducted in collaboration with my colleagues, Mr. Wu Shing. Both of us are from the Hong Kong Baptist University School of Continuing Education, which is located in Hong Kong, China. Here is the flow of today's presentation. Firstly, I will introduce the background of the research, and then followed by the methodology, result discussions, and the last part is the conclusion. For the background of the research, I'm sure all of us believe that climate change is one of the greatest challenges that humanity needs to face nowadays. Sport is a very special site for climate change. On one hand, it exerted influences on this crisis, while on the other hand, sports is greatly influenced by climate change as well. Extreme weather events, ultraviolet, and rising temperatures are some of the examples for direct and indirect sports-specific risks. These risks affect sports performance and sometimes may even endanger the health of the athletes. Although climate change has a great impact on sports, this issue has not received comparatively sufficient attention in the sports field. Previous study revealed a strong correlation between public awareness of climate change and their knowledge of climate change. The aims and objectives of this study is to investigate the relationships between the levels of knowledge and attitudes towards climate change of athletes. Also, we will try to examine the discrepancies on these variables between amateur and recreational athletes. For the significance of study, climate change is definitely one of the significant contributors to sports performance. However, issues related to climate change seems not drawing sufficient attention in the sports field. It is hoping that the findings of this study would add value to address and assess the potential risks of athletes due to climate change, and also help to develop appropriate management strategies or educational programs related to climate change for different stakeholders in the field. For the methodology, the research is a cross-sectional study with 271 participants being recruited by convenient sampling in Hong Kong. The 271 participants were classified into two groups. The first group is the amateur athletes, while the second group is the recreational athletes. The classifications was based on their training and competition experiences. All of them need to complete a self-administered questionnaire. This questionnaire consists of 4 parts. The first part is the demographic data collections, while the second one is knowledge of climate change, consists of 15 questions and help to assess participants' level of their climate change knowledge. The third part is about attitudes toward climate change. It consists of 6 questions assessing participants' attitudes towards climate change. The last part is a self-developed questions, which consists of 8 questions assessing participants' actions in response to the impact of climate change in the sports field. For the statistical analysis, Spearman row rank order correlation was used to investigate the relationship between the knowledge level and attitudes towards climate change of participants, while independent sample t-test was also used to find out the discrepancies in knowledge level of climate change between amateur and recreational athletes. The significance level of all analysis was set at 0.05. Here we come to the results part. Let's take a look at the background of participants first. For the 271 participants, the average age is 24.79. When we classify them into male and female participants, we have 136 male participants and 135 female participants for these studies. The average age for the former is 24.94, while the latter is 24.63. When we further classified participants by the types of athletes they belong to, for amateur athletes, we have 109, while for recreational athletes, we have 162 participants joining this study. The average age for the amateur athletes is slightly smaller, that is 22.94, while the one for the recreational athletes are slightly higher, which is 26.03. In these studies, the climate change knowledge of all participants was being assessed by 15 questions. Hence, the full mark for this part is 15. No matter for male or female participants, or amateur and recreational athletes, the average score was quite similar, which is around 11. For the attitudes towards climate change, most of the participants agree or strongly agree that they have some concern or awareness on climate change. The majority goes to agree, which is around 51% of all participants, while second goes to neutral, that's around 37%. Only very few of them, around 2%, consider they have no concern or no awareness about the climate change. When we further look into the attitudes toward climate change by genders, we notice that similar patterns was observed. For male or female participants, most of them also agree that they have some concern or awareness towards climate change. Similar patterns was also observed when we look into the awareness of climate change by amateur athletes and recreational athletes. The majority also agree that they have some concern or awareness on the climate change. In these studies, we also collect information about the habits of all participants in checking weather conditions before exercising. The level of ultraviolet, rainfall, humidity, and temperatures are the common information that participants would collect before exercising. Overall speaking, most of the participants did not check any weather conditions before engaging in exercise. That account for around 51.7%. Similar pattern was observed when we classified participants into male and female participants. However, different patterns were observed when we further classified participants into amateur athletes or recreational athletes. For recreational athletes, most of them, around 54.9%, did not check weather conditions before exercising, while for amateur athletes, around 53.2% of them did check weather conditions before engaging in exercise. As mentioned in the methodology, independent t-test was used in analyzing the differences in knowledge level of climate change between different types of participants. No statistical significant differences were found when we made comparisons between female and male participants or amateur and recreational athletes. Then we talk about the correlation between knowledge level and attitudes toward climate change of participants. Overall speaking, we find a weak and positive correlation between knowledge level of climate change and awareness of climate change of all participants. Also, we find a positive and weak correlation of knowledge level of climate change and self-evaluation of personal responsibility for reducing climate change of all participants. For the self-evaluation on personal responsibility for reducing climate change, it was found to have a weak and positive correlations with the awareness of climate change as well. When we classified participants into male and female athletes, slightly different patterns for correlation between knowledge level and attitudes towards climate change was obtained. For male participants, we noticed that there was a weak and positive correlation between knowledge level of climate change and awareness of climate change. However, no significant correlation between knowledge level of climate change and self-evaluations on personal responsibility for reducing climate change. A moderate and positive correlations was identified between awareness of climate change and personal responsibility for reducing climate change. For female participants, only a weak and positive correlations was identified between knowledge level and personal responsibility for reducing climate change. A weak and positive correlations was also identified between awareness of climate change and personal responsibility for reducing climate change. For amateur athletes, a moderate and positive correlations was identified between knowledge level of climate change and awareness of climate change. For recreational athletes, a weak and positive correlations was found between knowledge level of climate change and personal responsibility for reducing climate change. A moderate and positive correlations was found between awareness of climate change and personal responsibility for reducing climate change. Here is the summary for the correlation between knowledge level and attitudes towards climate change for gender. This is another slide for the summary of correlation between knowledge level and attitudes toward climate change for amateur athletes and recreational athletes. Now, let's discuss about the findings. For the attitudes toward climate change, over 58% of participants strongly agree or agree that climate change is an important issue that they are concerned or aware of. Climate change does not affect the sports performance of athletes only, but endangers their health as well. Thus, this topic should receive sufficient attention for all stakeholders in the sports field. We also collected information about climate change-related actions in this study. Climate change causes direct and indirect health risks to athletes, for example, extreme temperatures, ultraviolet radiation, or air pollutants. Checking weather conditions before exercising has been considered as one of the actions in response to climate change. However, less than 50% of participants in this study did it. When comparisons were made between amateur and recreational athletes, over 50% of amateur athletes checked the weather conditions before exercising, while less than 50% of recreational athletes did. Checking the weather conditions allows athletes to take necessary actions for getting rid of the threat of climate change on their health. Hence, more educational promotion should be done on these issues for different types of athletes, including professional, amateur, and recreational. Now it comes to the last part of the discussions, correlation between knowledge level and attitudes towards climate change. Previous studies supported a small positive correlation between knowledge level and awareness of climate change, which is consistent with the findings in this study. However, differences were identified in the correlation with the two variables when comparisons was made between male and female participants and amateur and recreational athletes. A small positive correlation between knowledge level and awareness of climate change was identified in male athletes, but no significant correlations was reviewed between the two variables in female athletes. Similar situations was identified in amateur and recreational athletes. A moderate positive correlation between knowledge level and awareness of climate change was found in amateur athletes, but no significant correlations was reviewed in recreational athletes. Results suggest that athletes with different backgrounds may have different factors affecting their awareness of climate change. For conclusion, climate change imposes significant impact on sports. Contradictory to the levels of its impact, the issue of climate change hasn't received sufficient attention in sports sectors. Unlike other studies focusing on the general populations, these studies investigate the problem among athletes. Gender differences was identified between the two variables. Besides, discrepancies of the two variables were also identified between amateur and recreational athletes. Findings suggested that the development of policy and education program should be specific to gender or type of athletes. This is the end of the presentations. Thank you.